it concerns an ancient curse or a modern-day haunting, it is interesting to note that the power of women is a recurring subject whenever one speaks of Ireland. Indeed, the country itself is referred to as Mother Ireland. At the entrance to Kinsale Harbor, a historic fort has been the domain of a ghostly lady in white for nearly 300 years. As the story is told, a young girl was engaged to an officer stationed here at the time her father was the commandant. The night before the wedding, she and the young man were strolling along the battlements. She noticed some flowers growing down to the water's edge. A sentry on duty nearby offered to climb down and get them for her if the officer would stand his post for him. The officer did so, and as the chill of the evening came on, the girl went inside to get her shawl. The young officer sat down in the sentry box and soon fell asleep. Not long afterwards, the girl's father appeared making his rounds and found the young man sleeping. Not recognizing him, the commandant drew his pistol and shot the man for being asleep on duty. Hearing the shot, the young girl ran frantically to the battlements. Once there, she saw her fiancé dead, and in anguish jumped to her death. Despondent, the commandant returned to his quarters, and later that night he took his own life. Each October, on the anniversary of the triple deaths, the ghost of the bereaved girl appears in her father's house. 20 accounts of her appearance have been documented since the latter part of the 17th century. Ted McCarthy was one such witness.
Now, on the 4th of October last year, I was here with another worker in the fort. And at closing time, we were doing a rounds of the fort. And just a little bit over there, we looked over here, and in the doorway here, there was like a white, like a cloud, the shape of a lady in olden time dress. So we shouted over and we took no notice. We went on the way up to the bastion. And on the way back, it was still there. It was like a form dressed in olden time clothing, you know. And as we approached over, it just vanished through the wall.
Undoubtedly, the spirit of the young girl is not alone, for within sight of this coast in 1915, the ill-fated ocean liner Lusitania sank with heavy loss of life. Some of those unfortunate souls are buried here in a small village graveyard not far from the fort. Irish women have long been known for their headstrong ways as well as for their beauty. The wife of Gregory Hoare was no exception. In 1566, England was pressing hard at the heart of Ireland. Gregory Hoare felt his loyalty was to the British Crown, but his wife Slaney was steadfast in her hatred of the English. In their home at Castle Gregory, her political opinions were well known by all who passed through the gates, proudly inscribed in Latin as the House of Gregory Hoare. That winter, the English Lord Grey, who was en route to attack the Irish rebels at nearby Smerwick Harbor, sent word to Gregory that he wished to quarter his officers at the castle. Gregory Hoare was delighted, but his wife Slaney was furious. A violent argument ensued. Enraged, Gregory stabbed her through the heart and ordered the servants to seal her body in the tower. Struggling to the window, Slaney died before she could cry out. Ironically, Castle Gregory was later destroyed because of Gregory's sympathy toward the English, and the stones of the great house were used to build the present village of Castle Gregory. Nothing remains of the house of Gregory Hoare but the archway, standing alone in a small country garden. But according to witnesses, each year on the anniversary of the stabbing, a nerve-wracking scream can be heard carried on the wind as it blows across the Dingle Peninsula where Slaney died. Some say it is more a scream of defiance than of pain. This is Castleguard in County Limerick, and again the apparition seen is that of a woman. Once the seat of the powerful O'Grady clan, Castleguard is one of the longest inhabited castles in all of Ireland. The exact cause of this particular haunting is not known, but one might surmise that it arises from the rather blood-curdling architectural feature of the main tower. On the third floor, just down the hall from one bedroom, is another doorway. It looks to be another bedroom door, but inside is a man-made chasm 50 feet deep, a murder hole. Any unsuspecting soul who entered unaware would surely fall to their death. The parents of David Thompson still reside at Castleguard, and as the male heir, he too will one day inherit the ancient fortress.
I was born and reared in this old castle, and as you may imagine, I'm very fully aware of all the legends and ghost stories and so forth that go with a place of this age. One of the most famous ones, and well known, is the story of the murder hole, where people were pushed to their death down through a hollow in the wall. And naturally, for safety reasons, this murder hole has now been covered in. Another one is the case where a little old lady comes down the stairs with chains on her ankles. This is heard by clanking of chains. She has a white sort of night dress on, and she's seen from time to time. I personally haven't seen her because she has been seen by my mother.
Why is it that women are so often involved in spiritual hauntings in Ireland? One possible explanation is that women have long played an important role in the history of the country itself. Here at Tara, the High Kings came to stand before the Stone of Destiny and swear allegiance to their gods. The chief god of the Celts was thought to be a woman. The pagan gods of the Druids were worshipped for more than 2,000 years, but as the dawn of the Christian era swept across Europe, the power of the pagan priests began to wane. Here on Boa Island stands an ancient stone figure which perhaps symbolizes this transition, for it looks both backwards and forwards, as if from paganism to Christianity. Some years later, A young boy sold into slavery in Ireland was soon to change the face and faith of his adopted country. Devoting himself to the Christian priesthood, the young man was destined to become St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland. On Easter morning in the year 428, St. Patrick stood on this site overlooking Tara. Using the 3 leaves of the shamrock to symbolize the Trinity, he succeeded in convincing the Irish king to let him preach the new religion throughout the land. St. Patrick became the keystone in the bridge by which men passed from paganism to Christianity. Using many of the old customs and ceremonies of the Druids, he interwove them into the Christian beliefs. Before long, the hills and valleys of Ireland were adorned with countless churches and monastic institutions. As much a myth as man, St. Patrick soon became a legend. Among the many miracles attributed to him is the story of how he banished the serpents from the island. Whether truth or fiction, the fact remains, there are no snakes in the Ireland of today. For nearly 400 years after St. Patrick began his conversion of the pagan Celts, monasteries and churches flourished. From this prosperous period we find the first written history of the Irish as a nation. It also produced one of the most magnificent handwritten books ever found. But like so many vestiges of this long-departed people, it too raises unanswered questions. Considered by many historians to be the most beautiful book in the world, the Book of Kells is truly an ancient work of unequaled religious splendor, encompassing the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Taking untold years of labor to complete, this 8th century volume requires the aid of a magnifying glass to fully appreciate the intricacies of its design. No less than 158 separately scrolled lines within a single inch of space go together to create the decorated letters which begin many of the pages. Just how such an exacting task was accomplished before the invention of the magnifying glass remains an unanswered mystery. There is, however, an indication that the ancestors of this country did possibly possess the knowledge of optics required to execute such a work as we find in the Book of Kells. This is the world's first giant telescope. Built under the direction of the 3rd Earl of Ross, this crudely fashioned device nevertheless was the most sophisticated optical instrument of its time and led to the discovery of the first spiral nebula. It remained the largest telescope in the world until after 1900. Like a giant arm pointing to the heavens, this antique relic reaches out to the world beyond planet Earth. Concern for what lies beyond the physical life man shares with other creatures on this planet has always been important to the Irish people. A strong belief in a spiritual life after earthly death is perhaps one reason there is such a proliferation of churches in Ireland. Many of these houses of worship have unusual, haunting histories. St. Michan's in Dublin is one such place. It was here that Frederick Handel came to rehearse before giving the first performance of his famous Messiah in April of 1742. Founded in 1096 by the Danes, St. Nickens has long been the resting place for those who fought for the freedom of Ireland. If stones could talk, these would have much to say about Irish independence. Deep underground, beneath the main sanctuary of the church, is a mystery that even today remains unsolved. The remains of these ancient citizens of Erin are surprisingly well preserved. Just how this was accomplished, scientists cannot explain, although some have theorized that the high content of tannic acid in the soil may have slowed down the natural decay of the body. When the church was being renovated in 1686, the Crusader was discovered, so called because of the unusual manner in which the body was placed in the coffin, with the legs broken and crossed. But others maintain that he was a rebel who died protecting Mother Ireland. Nearby, the coffins of two other Irish rebels, the Shears brothers, who were executed for their part in the rebellion of 1798. For 2,000 years, Ireland was the scene of numerous invasions by outside armies. In 1172, an incursion by England succeeded in bringing the Irish under the rule of a foreign flag. This occupation was to last for nearly 800 years. Stripped of their basic civil rights, the Irish continued to resist. But many of those unfortunate enough to be captured were brought to out-of-the-way fortresses such as this for questioning. Though built in 1180 by the Geraldines, little is known about the castle until the time of Charles Townley, who took possession in the mid-17th century. Townley held a somewhat obscure position within the English parliamentary government which ruled Ireland at the time. Here in the dungeons, he extracted confessions from the rebel prisoners. The blood-stained, rusted wrist irons used for this purpose remain as ghastly reminders of the torturous events which took place here. But Townley is remembered for an even more heinous crime. In an apparent attempt at friendship, he invited 200 local townspeople to celebrate Mass at the castle. When everyone was kneeling to receive the sacraments, Townley's soldiers swept through the room and slaughtered the entire congregation. But the souls of that massacre at last gained their revenge when Townley's only descendant heir, Roderick, was struck down by leprosy. Through the years, the men of Erin persisted and waged guerrilla warfare against their British rulers. Fighting alongside their womenfolk, the men of Ireland finally shook off the shackles of foreign dominance. In 1922, the treaty was signed, and Ireland was declared a free republic. But partition was a condition of the treaty, leaving 6 counties in the north under the rule of England. 1 year before the treaty, this quiet country lane was the scene of a brief but fatal skirmish. Returning from a routine patrol, 3 Irish rebels were ambushed. Throughout the countryside, many such encounters are marked by permanent memorials, and the spiritual presence of those who died here is often felt and respected by those who pass this way today as free men. It is not surprising that a country steeped with such a history has a prevalence of apparitions and ghostly sightings. Dublin's fair city, the capital of the Republic of Ireland. Founded in the early 9th century by Viking traders, the city was established around an important crossing on the River Liffey and became one of the first metropolitan centers in the Emerald Isle. The name Dublin came from the original Norse name meaning the Black Pool. The city prospered as a fortified Norman stronghold, and by the 12th century, Dublin was a major center of industry and commerce. The natural harbors in and around Dublin Bay, site of the original Viking landings, date back to the Bronze Age when copper and gold shipped from here, bound for ports as far away as Egypt. Originally surveyed by the infamous Captain Bligh, these harbors have seen the arrival and departure of many a conqueror and vanquished foe. Dublin seems always to have been a cosmopolitan city. The Huguenots from France sought shelter here, as did the Dutch, Polish, and Italians. Religious freedom was the order of the day, as Protestants, Quakers, Jews, and Catholics all lived and traded together in the streets of old Dublin. Among the many reasons for Dublin's fame is a most notable court case concerning a haunted house. The year was 1885, and while the world awaited news of General Gordon in the Sudan, and Oscar Wilde was appearing at a local theater, a landlord brought his tenant to trial for damages done to the rented house. The tenant defended the tattered condition of the house on the grounds that the dwelling was haunted by a poltergeist. Calling on some 20 witnesses, he succeeded in convincing the court that the smashed furniture and other damages had indeed been caused by phantom spirits who had harassed he and his wife for nearly a year. As reported in the Freeman's Journal of February 1885, in the case of Waldron versus Kernan, Judge Morris found the tenant blameless. It would seem that no self-respecting Irish home is without its resident ghost. Such is the case of stately Malahide Castle, just north of Dublin. Built in the 12th century by Richard Talbot, the castle remained in the Talbot family for nearly 800 years. The ghost of Malahide is said to be a dwarf. The dwarf was thought to be an old retainer who once lived in the castle, and in the great hall there is a most unusual architectural feature that was built specifically to accommodate him. Beside the doorway into the hall is another door of an uncommon size and shape. It leads to a stairway and onto the balcony above. Here, anyone looking out the window has a clear view of the surrounding countryside. The dwarf ghost is said to be continuing his vigilant watch for enemies approaching the castle. Appropriately bemused, The portrait of Jonathan Swift, author of Gulliver's Travels, the story of a man captured and befriended by little people, hangs on the opposite wall facing the dwarf's door. Unfortunately, not all ghosts are as well-intentioned as the dwarf of Malahide Castle. This is Killikee House, situated high in the mountains above Dublin. This is perhaps the most singularly haunted house in Ireland. The young family that now reside here have neither seen nor heard anything of a supernatural nature, and today Killikee House is a haute cuisine restaurant. But for several years prior to this time, the house was occupied by Mrs. Margaret O'Brien, who, along with other members of her family, was witness to numerous frightening events. A former journalist, she is now writing a book documenting the hauntings of Killikee House.
Well, when I first came to this house, we had no idea that there was anything wrong with the house. We put in a number of workmen because the repairs were very extensive, and they just didn't stay. There were noises all the time. They complained of no sleep at night. All kinds of noises. The great hall door, over 200 years old, would open. They'd lock it. We then put 2 bolts on it, top and bottom, as well as the middle lock. And you could come along an hour afterwards and find it open again. And one day, one of the men saw a huge black cat. A cat as large as an Alsatian dog, with flame-colored eyes, red, menacing eyes. And they got such a fright that everybody left. After that, we got 2 lots of men in. The same thing happened each time. At the back of this 200-year-old bell tower, we discovered a passageway, and near the passageway, the grave of a crippled boy. He was the son of someone who lived in the house hundreds of years ago, and he suffered from hydrocephalus, and after medical examination, we had him reburied in the same grave, and the grave blessed. Long after this period, my mother saw this boy, and she described him as being about 4 feet high, having a monstrous head and twisted neck. She was very frightened when she saw him. But following that time, he was seen by 2 or 3 other people, and they gave exactly the same description of him.